Israel has crossed a new threshold in the long and bitter conflict that has defined the region for decades. For the first time, its air force carried out a strike inside Qatar, a country that until now had been seen as a neutral ground for negotiations and one of the key mediators in the Gaza conflict. The target was Hamas's political leadership in the heart of Doha, a place often considered untouchable because of its international importance and its ties to both Washington and the wider Arab world. The operation, conducted jointly by the IDF and the Internal Security Agency Shin Bet, specifically aimed at senior negotiators Khalil Haya and Khaled Mashal. These two figures were reported to be reviewing the latest US ceasefire proposal when the attack occurred. Although both survived, the strike killed at least 5 mid-ranking Hamas officials, many of whom had direct involvement in ongoing talks. With their deaths, one of the last serious channels for a ceasefire in Gaza may have been cut off. This action does not just alter the political dynamics in Gaza, but threatens to reshape the role Qatar has played for years as a diplomatic bridge in the region. For years, Qatar has been the center of mediation between Israel, Hamas, and the broader international community. It was in Doha where hostages were released, ceasefire deals were drafted, and temporary truces were hammered out under the watchful eye of American diplomats. Qatar has also served as a crucial partner to Washington by hosting Al-Udeid, the largest U.S. airbase in the Middle East and home to thousands of American troops. This base has long been the backbone of U.S. operations in the Gulf, making Qatar's position uniquely important and difficult to challenge. But Israel's strike has changed that equation. By targeting Hamas inside Doha, Israel has effectively dismantled the ceasefire talks, diminished the credibility of U.S. security guarantees, and demonstrated that even safe havens in allied states are no longer immune from attack. The emirate, which for years managed the delicate balancing act of playing both sides, has now found itself in the crossfire. What makes this even more controversial is that the meeting between Hamas leaders in Doha was reportedly initiated by Trump, who had urged them to consider the terms for ending the conflict. The timing of the strike has therefore fueled suspicions that the American proposal was never a genuine offer of peace, but rather a trap designed to lure senior Hamas figures into a vulnerable position where they could be eliminated. Hamas has since accused the United States of being complicit in the attack, an allegation that has received little coverage in mainstream outlets. Out of 97 media reports on the incident, nearly half came from right-leaning outlets, which raises concerns about media bias and the ways in which public perception can be shaped or distorted. The lack of balanced reporting risks, leaving the public with only fragments of the truth, something that becomes increasingly dangerous in a conflict already filled with disinformation. Qatar now has the rare and unenviable distinction of being bombed by both Iran and Israel in just a few months. On June 23, Iran launched a strike on Al-Udeid airbase in retaliation for a U.S. attack on its nuclear facilities, but in that case, Tehran signaled the attack in advance, giving both Qatar and the United States time to prepare and limit casualties. The Israeli strike, however, was far less predictable and carried out with much greater secrecy. The White House claims that U.S. forces observed Israeli jets heading toward the Gulf and were only informed officially after the operation had already begun. According to Washington, a warning was relayed to Doha, but Qatari officials insist no such warning reached them in time, raising more questions than answers about who knew what and when. The logistical details of the strike are equally puzzling. To reach Doha, Israeli F-35s would have had to cross Jordanian and Saudi airspace, launching long-range over-the-horizon missiles after traveling roughly 1,700 kilometers one way. That means a 3,400-kilometer round trip, a distance well beyond the operational range of F-35s without mid-air refueling. Because this was a stealth mission, the jets would not have been fitted with external fuel tanks, which further limited their operational range to around 2,100 kilometers. This does not account for fuel burned during maneuvers or the weight of their payloads. All signs point to mid-air refueling, likely carried out by tankers under U.S. Central Command. Adding to the mystery, A British Voyager tanker was recorded taking off from Qatar around the time of the strike, circling for several hours before returning to base. Some speculated that Britain had refueled the Israeli jets, but this is unlikely because the Voyager relies on a pro-Bandrogue system, while the Israeli F-35A requires a flying boom. The systems are incompatible, making British involvement improbable. Another theory reported by the Wall Street Journal is that the Israeli jets avoided Arab airspace entirely by flying over the Red Sea and launching air-launched ballistic missiles toward Doha. These missiles reportedly reached low Earth orbit before striking their targets, but, if true, they would have been detected by US space-based sensors. Even in this scenario, the range would still have exceeded the capacity of Israeli jets without external support, again pointing toward US involvement. Just as troubling as the logistics is the silence of Qatar's air defenses. Doha has invested heavily in advanced systems such as Patriot, VAD-NASAMS, and Skynex batteries, as well as fleets of F-15s, Rafales, and Eurofighters. These assets should have detected incoming aircraft and missiles long before they reached the capital, yet none of them were activated. The lack of any defensive response suggests that Qatar's leadership, much like the Trump administration, may have been aware of the operation in advance, but either pressured or forced by circumstance to allow it to proceed. This leaves open serious questions about Qatar's sovereignty and its ability to act independently in the face of decisions imposed by larger powers. While no definitive evidence has surfaced, the available information paints a picture of coordination, or at least tacit approval by the United States. Qatar's Ministry of Foreign Affairs condemned the strike as a violation of sovereignty, and several other Gulf Arab states echoed the statement. But the condemnation does little to change the fact that the strike happened unchallenged. Even if the attack missed its main targets, it sent a powerful and unsettling message. When Israel believes its security is at risk, it will act regardless of international red lines, diplomatic fallout, or the sovereignty of other nations. Places that once seemed untouchable, such as Doha, are no longer guaranteed safe havens. The Israeli ambassador to the United States reinforced this message bluntly by stating that if Israel did not succeed this time, it would get its targets the next time. This statement underlines a new phase of Israeli strategy, one in which cross-border assassinations may become more common, even at the cost of straining relationships with allies and deepening its international isolation. The implications of this strike stretch far beyond Doha. It signals a shift in the rules of engagement in the region, showing that even powerful intermediaries like Qatar cannot shield themselves from the consequences of this conflict. It also exposes the fragile nature of alliances, the dangers of biased information flows, and the increasing willingness of states to risk escalation in pursuit of security objectives. The long-term effects remain uncertain, but what is clear is that the balance of power in the Middle East has tilted into a new and dangerous direction, where trust, diplomacy, and safe havens can collapse with a single strike, at the request of the United States and with Israel's silent approval. Qatar began hosting Hamas in 2010. The reasoning was straightforward but complicated. Washington wanted a neutral venue where Israeli and Hamas officials could engage in dialogue during times of war, and Doha offered the wealth, security, and geopolitical positioning to play that role. By offering sanctuary to Hamas's political bureau, Qatar hoped to elevate its international standing and act as a bridge between warring factions. Over the years, leaders such as Mashal and Khalil al-Haya became regular figures in the city, moving between Doha's conference halls and private residences under Qatari protection. For a time, this arrangement produced tangible results. When the fighting intensified in Gaza, the world would turn to Doha, where ceasefire proposals were drafted and hostages were released. However, the longer Hamas remained in Qatar, the more scrutiny the arrangement attracted. The United States and Israel, initially supportive of Qatar's role, began to sour on the idea. American officials became frustrated that negotiations dragged on without delivering lasting peace, while Israel accused Qatar of offering Hamas too much legitimacy by hosting its leadership in luxury while civilians in Gaza bore the brunt of the war. By October 2023, the mood had shifted so strongly that Qatari diplomats were already speaking to their American counterparts about the possibility of scaling back their relationship with Hamas after the hostage negotiations. These discussions revealed Doha's growing unease and its awareness that what had once been an asset in diplomacy was quickly becoming a liability. Despite the growing criticism, Qatar did manage some significant breakthroughs. In November 2023, it brokered a temporary ceasefire that allowed more than 100 Israeli hostages to be released, an achievement celebrated internationally and seen as proof that Doha's gamble was paying off. Another truce was arranged in January 2025, but it collapsed in just 2 months, plunging negotiations into stalemate. As the situation deteriorated, Israeli leaders, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, became increasingly vocal, accusing Doha of shielding Hamas and failing to apply the pressure needed to secure the release of the remaining hostages. The accusations placed Qatar in an impossible position, torn between maintaining its mediator role and appeasing both Washington and Tel Aviv. By November 2024, the strain became unbearable, and Qatar suspended its mediation efforts, publicly declaring that neither Hamas nor Israel was negotiating in good faith. Yet the story did not end there. Under pressure from the incoming Trump administration, which wanted Doha to continue its role as an intermediary, Qatar reversed its decision the following month. This demonstrated the country's unenviable position, damned if it continued, and damned if it withdrew. The recent Israeli strike inside Qatar has now made the situation even more precarious. The attack has hardened Hamas's stance, reducing any incentive for the group to accept Israel's terms. At the same time, Doha faces mounting pressure from the United States to expel Hamas's leadership and prove that it is not complicit in prolonging the conflict. But by removing Hamas from its soil, Doha would also lose its leverage as a mediator, effectively ending its ability to shape the trajectory of the war. Mediation is now expected to shift toward Egypt and the United States, but neither has demonstrated the influence needed to pressure Hamas into meaningful concessions. For Qatar, the risks have multiplied. Hosting Hamas without the cover of being an active mediator makes it a more vulnerable target for Israeli airstrikes, even if those strikes are limited compared to Israel's campaigns in Lebanon and Syria. This reality makes it increasingly probable that Doha will eventually expel Hamas's leadership, a move that would prolong the war in Gaza as Israel escalates its military campaign without fear of diplomatic fallout in Doha. Meanwhile, the United States has revealed the limits of its security guarantees. Despite its massive presence at Al-Udeid, the largest American base in the region, Washington has twice failed to protect Qatar's airspace in less than a year, first during Iran's missile strike and now during Israel's airstrike. This has exposed Qatar to the uncomfortable truth that American power, while formidable, cannot always be relied upon for defense. Doha will now be weighing its options carefully, considering alternative security partnerships. Turkey, which maintains hundreds of troops in Qatar, may become a more prominent player in its air defense. This would not be unprecedented. During the 2017 Saudi and Emirati blockade of Qatar, it was Turkey rather than the United States that sent troops to deter a potential invasion. In the near future, Turkey's role could expand further, giving Doha a safety net that American guarantees have failed to provide. Qatar may also pursue closer ties with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, a move that would have been unthinkable during the blockade, but now appears increasingly pragmatic. Yet for all its maneuvering, Doha's political weight remains limited. In the great game of statecraft, the small emirate lacks the military strength and geopolitical clout of its neighbors. Its influence lies primarily in its vast wealth, which it uses to buy influence, maintain stability, and secure its survival. The delicate balance it once struck between hosting Hamas, maintaining ties with Washington, and mediating between enemies has now been shattered. The path ahead looks uncertain, fraught with risks that could either strip Qatar of its role entirely or drag it deeper into the heart of the conflict. Asterisk.